Police around the country are warning drivers to take care on our roads this Easter long weekend. Police say they'll be ready for those drivers who fail to obey the law.
A father and his 3 children head off for their yearly camping holiday.
Beth, my wife, she decided she wanted to do other things, so I packed the van, checked it all out.
Afternoon traffic was already building up. There'll be more police officers and radars on the roads this Easter to make sure we arrive alive.
Once we'd done that, we headed off and, we were just cruising up the highway.
Many of us have been caught in traffic and been frustrated as a result of an accident up ahead. But when a person dies as a result of a hit and run, the area becomes a crime scene. In it are vital clues and evidence that must be found in order to track down the guilty driver.
It was reasonably late at night and the fuel was getting low, and got to the Violet Town sign and saw that, it was the next turn-off. So I was looking out for the turning bay and, suddenly there was a loud noise. The car started to veer quite dramatically. I virtually lost control of the steering. I didn't know what had happened. I couldn't work out whether it was a blowout or it could have been any number of things that I thought of, but I just thought, well, I've just got to try and maintain control. But the car seemed to have a will of its own and took off towards the median strip. The next thing you know, we were in a roll, and we just seemed to be rolling forever.
The first police members at the scene had initially believed that it was a single vehicle car and caravan rollover and one person was dead.
And it wasn't until an hour later that one of the policemen spoke to a female witness who had helped the people in the car and been told that a truck had actually hit the caravan.
That completely changes the nature of the collision, of course, and the investigation that's required.
We're already an hour behind the 8 ball as far as a pristine scene is concerned, because every second that occurs after that, evidence is lost. We had traffic travelling through in the right northbound lane, directly through what was to be our crime scene.
So I instructed the local members up there to close the scene off completely, not to move anything, to make sure they get the details from all the people that were at the collision scene before they left.
We had 3 vehicles travelling along the freeway around the time of the collision. One vehicle was about 100 metres behind at the time. Of those 3 vehicles, all they were able to tell us was seeing the truck diverge hard to the right into the median strip in a large cloud of dust, and that was the last they saw. And then, of course, they immediately came across the collision scene itself.
I didn't find out it was a truck until I'd got out of the car and asked one of the people that stopped to help. I just said, "Oh, what happened? What hit me?" And they said, "Oh, it was a truck." And then the police and the ambulance arrived. I'm not sure in what order they came. I know I was more concerned about the children, really.
The collision had taken the life of Ian's 12-year-old son, Nicky.
But I really didn't find out till I was in the ambulance that he'd gone.
The hit-run investigations takes fairly high priority. We would treat it the same as like the homicide squad with a murder investigation. Obviously, when there's a murder involved, they're trying to ascertain the identity of the offender involved because they're no longer at the scene. and that's the same with the hit-run investigation. The only difference is that a motor vehicle is used as a weapon to cause the death. So we want to try and track that down.
Two things happen with hit runs. Either the driver dumps the vehicle nearby and leaves on foot, or he drives the vehicle to somewhere where he feels he can safely hide it away. It's important for us to find that vehicle at the first possible opportunity.
Each minute that goes by, this person gets further and further away. An hour's gone by, if they're from interstate, travelling at 100 kilometres an hour, they're 100 kilometres away.
What I did was have a roadblock set up on the Hume Highway up at the border to Wodonga, and asked the police up there to pull over all trucks and examine them for damage.
As the roads were closed, the Major Collision Investigation Unit arrived at the scene and began looking for clues as to what had happened.
We had the caravan and the four-wheel drive, but the dynamics of what actually occurred is not immediately known. What was quite obvious was that there was a great amount of force that had sheared a piece directly off the caravan and deposited it somewhere. The four-wheel drive was upside down. We noticed that we had two impressions in the right quarter panel of that car. It looked pretty clear that that may have been from a bull bar, from a reasonably big truck.
There was also a quantity of paint transfer on the back of the caravan and the Mazda. Whenever you get contact between two vehicles, and it doesn't matter what two vehicles they are, there is a transfer of material. In this case, we had some red paint smears on the back of the caravan. We had a red paint smear on the Mazda. Does that tell us that we're dealing with a red truck? Not necessarily, but it tells us that we're dealing with a truck that's got red somewhere on the front of it. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it's a starting point.
We've got a situation of a family that's lost one of their children. And we, as they do, want to know why. Why is their son being killed? And the only person that can tell us that is the driver of that vehicle that's left the scene.
A 12-year-old boy deserves more than to be left by the side of the Hume freeway for dead.
It wasn't until daylight that the extent of the scene became obvious. It extended over probably 400 metres and took into account the median strip and the two northbound lanes.
We're dealing with a crime scene on this road. There's been a person killed and there's a driver that's left the scene, and it's imperative that we collect all that evidence so that we can analyse what's gone on, and if somebody's committed an offence, we can have a successful prosecution down the track.
This was Good Friday on the Easter holidays. We'd closed the Hume Highway northbound. That was necessary. If you've got a collision scene on a major road, you can't put crime scene tape around it, put someone on guard and say, we'll be back tomorrow to have another look at this. You've got one shot, so we need to keep the road closed and do the work we need to do that day. And that's what we did.
So a lot of motorists get upset, but we can't do anything about that until we actually collect all the evidence we need to. Essentially at the scene we go through what's commonly called a 7-point crime scene search. It's effectively photographing what we see, evidence on the roadway, evidence on the vehicles. We then measure the location of all those items using a geodometer total survey station. That particular device has the ability to measure horizontal angles, vertical angles, and the distance from where our surveying instrument was set up. We took tyre friction measurements to determine that there was sufficient friction material on the road surface. The road surface was of good quality. There was good weather conditions, there was no fog, it was a clear night, it was a dry night. So there was no real environmental factors present with respects to this event. The vehicle had left skid marks on the road surface prior to impact, so the brakes on the vehicle are operating. So it comes back that there was human factors present here as to why this has occurred.
The tyre marks on the road told a further story. Along with complicated mathematical equations, Peter Bellion could reconstruct what happened before, during and after the collision, as well as the speed of each vehicle.
Essentially, there's three main types of tyre marks we might find at a collision scene, and we had effectively those three at this scene at Violet Town. The first tyre marks that we had were the dual tyre skid marks from the heavy vehicle. Then they became what we call skip skids, where the heavy vehicle's trailer's essentially bouncing a little bit. The other type of tyre marks we found were tyre scuff marks, and they're typically associated with like a loss of control type of event. And my conclusions were that the truck had skidded around about 26 metres prior to the impact. At the start of those skid marks, I calculated it was travelling at approximately 106 kilometres per hour. The passenger side front of the heavy truck involved had struck the driver's side rear of the caravan, and that sent those vehicles out of control, and they went into a clockwise rotation around towards the right-hand side of the traffic lanes and towards the centre median strip. Then that tyre mark evidence indicated that there was a secondary collision between the passenger side front again of the heavy truck and the driver's side front guard of the Mazda Bravo. And subsequent to that, the tyre mark evidence then curved back to an anti-clockwise rotation around towards the left. Shortly after that, the coupling between the caravan and four-wheel drive had come off, and the caravan ended up sliding through to its reverse position on the centre median strip, with the four-wheel drive continuing to curve back towards the roadway. And that's when the tyre mark evidence then stopped all of a sudden, indicating that the four-wheel drive had tripped up on its wheels and gone into a rollover phase of the collision. After those tyre marks finished, we observed a number of gouge marks and scrape marks on the roadway, leading through to the ultimate rest position of the vehicle just prior to the Violet Town exit.
We walked further south along the side of the freeway, and there was the piece of caravan that had been sheared off. We noticed certain impressions which looked like a partial letter A or an inverted V. We weren't sure what it was, but there was a distinctive shape in there. They look very similar to perhaps a number plate. When we had a look at the road surface, one of the things we were looking for was material that may lead us to the vehicle that has left the scene. And I came across what I would consider, in the type of work we do, as the holy grail of evidence. And that's a fragment that's intact enough that we can take a lead from it.
After all the traffic that had gone through the scene the night before, potentially destroying evidence, a glass indicator lens was left behind.
And in this particular case, that fragment had a complete set of numbers.
It was probably from the truck. Hopefully we could identify what sort of indicator lens material it was, and it might even tell us what sort of vehicle it came off. The problem was there's approximately 160,000 trucks registered in Australia. We were hoping this was going to be one of those situations where the driver would give himself up, because often in hit-run collisions, a driver, having made a decision to leave the scene, will have second thoughts about what he's done. If it's going to happen, usually it happens within the first 24 to 48 hours.
A distraught father has made an emotional appeal to find a hit-run driver after a tragic smash on the Hume freeway. The man's 12-year-old son was killed when a truck rammed their caravan.
Ian Fleming choked back tears as he spoke of his 12-year-old son, Nicky, killed when their car was struck by a runaway driver.
Suddenly we just got this terrific impact in the back of the van. It swerved the car around. I thought it was a nightmare. My oldest son talking to me thought it was a dream. Couldn't believe it.
Police say the truckie knew exactly what he'd done.
I'd like him now to think about what he's done and honour himself and step forward, please.
After 12 hours of inspecting the scene, the road where Nicky Fleming had died was reopened. Police hoped among the evidence they had collected were clues to help them identify which one of the 160,000 trucks in Australia was involved.
The lens material found at the collision scene was examined down at the Forensic Science Laboratory. Inquiries were made regarding that, and it turned out that it was a lens manufactured by Heller.
And we confirmed it was a side direction indicator lamp. It had been something that was in production for the last 40 years and could be used in any application, whether it be marine or automotive, and could be fitted to any position on a truck. That really didn't take us very far, except that we were able to gain a whole section now to give us an idea of what we're actually looking at.
The panel from the back of the caravan had considerable damage, both from the impact and from being ripped off the caravan and having moved along the roadway. So there was a lot of indentations from gravel and roadway, but there were also clearly some sharp lines on it in the shape of an inverted V. I didn't really know what it could have been that caused that indentation.
This strange shape that looked like an A or, part of an A or similar, it had to be something low down, probably on the bull bar itself of the truck, whether it was a diamond-shaped sign as a hazard marker or something else that was an add-on to the bumper, perhaps next to the number plate or so. It just wasn't obvious as to what it was. There was too much missing to give a full picture. But there also seemed to be a weave pattern in there from some sort of fabric. It was something that wasn't metallic necessarily, but something that involved a bit of cloth material.
There was also a large amount of damage which came from something being thrust into the metal of the caravan and then pulling outwards again, like a large bolt.
Looking at the side of the caravan, there was some very heavy deposition of red paint that looked very fresh. These were triple layer paint samples that were stuck to the side of the caravan, and I was convinced that we were dealing with a bright red truck. But smears of paint, multiple layers of paint, are of limited value until you've got something to compare them to. And that was the general feeling that day, that yes, what we've got's nice, it's good to have evidence from the scene, but we've got nothing to compare it to.
By this stage, 2 or 3 days had passed by. Driver hadn't given himself up. The roadblock didn't yield any relevant information. We knew this was going to be a long, painstaking inquiry.
The semi-driver didn't stop, and Victorian Police have mounted a massive 3-state search for the vehicle.
It's a soft-sided semi-trailer and it has a bull bar. The semi-trailer should have either red paint damage on it, on either the prime mover or the trailer.
Police say there's no way the driver would not have known he was involved in an accident. Witnesses have told them it was almost a miracle that he was able to get his vehicle back onto the road after the smash.
A 12-year-old boy deserves more than to be left by the side of the Hume freeway for dead.
Usually you get a phone call from somebody, either anonymously or a tip through Crime Stoppers saying this is the bloke involved in the collision or his truck's at this location. We didn't get any of that in this case. So we used the trucking industry as best we could to try and gain more information. We printed flyers and had them put at truck stops. Most of them told us that if they knew anything, they wouldn't be trying to cover up for this bloke because it was a low act to run into the back of a caravan causing the death of a 12-year-old boy at Easter time and just simply drive off and disappear and not come forward to explain how it had happened. It appeared to us that the truck driver involved in this collision had gone to ground. But in these sort of investigations, that can't be the end of the matter. You just have to keep pushing on bit by bit, hoping to get a little more information this day or the next day, and slowly just piece things together.
And so the next step was to try to determine what bull bar might have been involved by measuring the impression on the caravan and the Mazda.
Bearing in mind that it was only one section of the bull bar, it would be possibly a quarter to a third of the overall width of the bull bar. So then it became part of the job of trying to find out what model or brand of bull bar could have caused those indentations.
The office brought in another police member from outside. We asked him at that stage to take on the onerous task of opening up the yellow pages and going through as many bull bar manufacturers as he could.
For 2 solid weeks, the constables sifted through the yellow pages from every state. At the same time, Carsten Schultz, who was now working on the case full-time, continued to stare at the strange A-shaped impression on the caravan, hoping that its origin would suddenly be revealed.
And I left the office that day, and I think to some extent I must have been feeling a bit guilty about dedicating so much time to this job rather than my family, that I said to my wife that, look, we'll just go in here, I'll just explain to you where we're at in this investigation. We saw a couple of trucks that I talked about the bull bar. I looked further down the road and the truck was facing me on the opposite side of the road, and it just hit me. Because I'd been poring over an enlargement of a photograph showing that strange letter A marking, and it was just something that was printed in my mind. On the face of the bull bar were a set of covers.
The excitement in Carsten's voice was palpable. Ted? Yes? What can you tell me, Carsten? He said, I can tell you what brand of truck it is.
Major Collision Investigation Officer Carsten Schultz believed he had found the brand of the truck involved in the collision that had taken the life of Nicky Fleming.
He was convinced that the W on the vinyl cover was what had made the impression on the back of the caravan.
I contacted the truck driver. We had a look at his truck to see if we could eliminate that from the inquiry, which we did. And he lent us one of the road train covers for comparison to the marks that we had on the back of the caravan.
The covers were a rectangular vinyl shape and had a large W appliqued over the top. The bottom part of the W was the inverted V that we'd looked at in the impressions. And the first stroke of the W was the piece of an opposing angle that we'd also found in the impressions. So I was fairly certain that that was what had caused the impression, even though I was quite surprised that something so fine had been able to leave that kind of sharp impression, so that the impact must have been quite great.
And it was a revelation. It was the next major step in the investigation, because we now weren't looking for 160,000 trucks. We were now breaking it down to a particular type of truck.
The Western Star covers are part of the bull bar and attached to it when the prime mover is not carrying a long haul. The bull bar on the truck Carsten had seen was manufactured by a company in Queensland. The search through the yellow pages was potentially over.
King Bars up in Queensland was able to identify that the bull bar we were looking for was a heavy-duty road train bull bar, which he'd manufactured for the last 4 or 5 years and was fitted to the model 4964F Western Star truck.
The investigation crew then went about confirming their belief that this type of bull bar was involved in the fatal collision.
The area of the bull bar that was of interest to us was reconstructed from the measurements from King Bars. It fitted perfectly against the Bravo panel and the bull bar for the areas of indentation, but of most interest, of course, was the back of the caravan, where we had a lot more of that indentation. It fitted into the area with all of the uprights and the cross struts, and also the eye bolt slotted perfectly into the area where the back of the caravan had been pierced and had it then ripped back out again.
It was marvellous to see how everything fitted together and left us in no doubt that we were looking at a King bar of this particular type. So yes, we've built part of the mystery truck.
The indicator lens that had been found at the crime scene was now of great assistance. It had only been fitted to Western Star trucks since 1993. Police were now able to narrow down the possible number of trucks involved in the collision from 160,000 to just 1,700.
Given that we knew it was a 4964F model, from the 1,700 that we had on that list from Western Star, we took that down to about 680.
We then looked at King Bar's records, identified all the trucks on that list that had been supplied with a heavy-duty road train bull bar, and crossed off any truck that wasn't supplied with vinyl covers. And at the end of the day, that left us with a list of 206.
And I was confident that within those 206 vehicles was the one we were looking for.
Strange thing about trucks, they're all over the place, but you don't take a lot of notice of them. When we were just looking for a truck, we had nothing specific to go by. But when we'd identified this as a Western Star 4964F truck fitted with a heavy-duty road train bull bar, they're all over the place. Every time you pulled up at a set of traffic lights and looked next to you, you saw a Western Star truck.
I became hyper-aware of Western Star trucks as soon as we'd made that link, and was going on holidays with my mother and father-in-law. And after a long stint of driving, we pull in for petrol, and I look across and I see a reddish-coloured truck in the distance. So I asked Don to take over the petrol, and I get to the front and I go straight to the bull bar. I squatted down and looked at the bottom rung of the bull bar, and it's cracked right through. I look down at the emblem and I see there's some damage to the red star in the middle of the emblem. So I start walking down the side of the truck. I see the side lamp, and I look next to that light and I see some damage, and that there's been an attempt made to cover it up, to put some reddish paint over the top so it's not visible. So I've now seen 3 things on this truck that say to me, this guy is a good candidate.
Then, unexpectedly, the good candidate was right next to Ted.
So I say, g'day, nice truck. How big's the engine? Thinking of what a truck enthusiast would say. So do you own the truck? And he said, yeah, the bank owns it. And I thought, good. In terms of the investigation, our perpetrator was always more likely to have been an owner-driver, because the fleet driver would have been asked, you know, what's this damage on your truck?
Because we had the registration number of that truck, we were able to confirm that it was owned and driven by a man who lived in Queensland by the name of Brett Kilmore.
Police now needed to see whether Kilmore was even in the area at the time. And by checking his mobile phone records on the night of the collision, they got their answer.
The phone records were a telling tale as to where he was at that time. And it was too close to the scene to be anybody else but him.
Kilmore's truck had been number 25 on the list of 206 trucks that the police were looking at. He was now number 1.
So we approached National Transport Insurance again and made specific inquiries in relation to him.
They didn't have a claim from him in relation to an accident or any damage to his truck caused at Easter time, but they certainly had claims from him from a number of collisions that had occurred after Easter time.
That truck currently was being repaired.
We needed to move fairly quickly if we were going to be able to examine his truck before any more work was done on
6 months after the hit-and-run collision, police had a prime suspect. The problem was his truck had been in 2 other accidents following the one they believed he caused at Easter. And that truck was now under repair.
I thought, well, this is going to be very challenging, but we are going to scour this truck and we are going to try to find anything that might give us a nexus back to the caravan and the car.
The truck's bull bar by that stage had been so badly damaged in the last collision that forensically it didn't appear that it was going to offer us very much at all.
However, the fuel tank on the passenger side of the truck had been rotated. And that was done because there was an area of impact damage to what was the outside of the fuel tank. It was, in my mind, evidence that Kilmore had tried to disguise the damage to his truck so that nobody would put 2 and 2 together.
But it was circumstantial. At this stage, there wasn't any physical evidence that clearly linked the truck and Kilmore to the collision near Violet Town.
So at the end of 2 days, pretty heartbroken that I hadn't got a definitive forensic link. But I've got lots of bits and pieces, including paint samples from the truck, and we took the emblem, the white W emblem from the truck, in the hope that further examination you might reveal something more useful down the track.
It was now time to interview their prime suspect. Brett Kilmore had agreed to come into a Brisbane police station on the ruse of answering questions about the recent accident he had in New South Wales.
We then told him that we were accident investigation members from Victoria and wanted to speak to him about a collision on Good Friday in Victoria. His initial reaction to that was to say, what collision, Victoria, I don't know what you're talking about.
But just before the tape interview began, things changed.
He became very sullen, started to shake, and eventually made the comment, I've been waiting 6 months for you blokes to come around.
And as soon as he said that, the realisation was, this is him. This is the bloke I've been looking for 6 months.
What can you tell me about that collision?
I was accidentally involved in the collision.
I'll just have to ask you to speak up a little bit.
Yes, I was involved with the collision.
How were you involved with the collision?
I touched the back of his caravan.
And can you recall when the first time you saw the caravan was?
When it was too late. Admittedly, I might have spotted him with not much distance. I was having difficulty with bright lights behind me. Mine was occupied on the idiot behind me. I'm not blaming him, he wasn't the cause of the accident. Well, he wasn't involved in the accident.
He said that he'd been distracted for 5 or 10 minutes prior to the impact by the very bright headlights of a car travelling behind him. I'd spoken to the people that were in the car travelling behind him, and they'd told me that no such thing had happened.
You know, I'm not a murderer. I did attempt to swerve. I thought that I would have had time to brake, swerve, but obviously not.
How long do you think then that you were looking in the rear vision mirror? For what period of time were you doing that before you actually looked back to the road ahead of you and then found the caravan there?
Well, at that stage I was trying to find the switch, and
in my mind, Kilmore seemed to be searching for an explanation that would account for the collision occurring without it really being his fault.
Run that by me again.
There's a caravan travelling in front of you in the left-hand lane. Mm-hmm. You don't see it until you're within about 20 metres of it.
So there was this gap, a huge gap. Was it concentration on supposedly the lights behind him? But for some reason, failed to keep a proper lookout of what's ahead of him. this huge white caravan. It's inexplicable how he couldn't have seen it.
Do you know whether the lights on the caravan were working?
But when I got up close enough to see him, with my bright lights, I could not see any bright lights glowing. All I can see is bright white caravan.
One of the things we do, particularly in a same direction collision at night time, is to examine the tail light assemblies and the light globe filaments of the vehicle that's been struck from behind. If the tail lights are on when the impact occurred, we find that the tungsten filaments of the globes become very hot, and when the vehicle's subjected to an impact, that coiled filament will stretch out of shape, so you get irregular distortion. So we examined those filaments, and that indicated that the lights on the back of the caravan were operating, so it should have been able to be seen.
Did you go back and make any attempt at all to find out exactly what had happened back there, whether anybody needed help, whether anybody was hurt?
I didn't think there was anybody left back there. I didn't think that there was... No, I didn't think that there was anyone hurt.
And you made a decision not to go back and find out?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Probably because I didn't want to see what may have been there.
Did you realise that if somebody was injured or killed in that collision that you probably were in serious trouble?
Yes.
And did that go through your mind?
Yes.
Kilmore had admitted to the collision, but police needed to find further evidence of his culpability. The interview wasn't over, nor was the forensic team's vital examination. Police had tracked down the truck driver they believed was involved in the fatal crash at Easter. While he admitted to being involved, Brett Kilmore thought that the lights from a car behind him had caused him to collide into the caravan.
He just seemed to be looking for something to hang his hat on that could account for why it happened.
Nearly 4 hours into the interview, the real story emerged.
Do you use any drugs or other prescription medications or other medications of any sort?
By no dose.
Now, no dose is supposed to some extent, help you stay awake for a bit longer.
Caffeine, yes.
Why do you use those?
Because when you feel doughy and you're running late because you can't get enough sleep, you try to take what is, available.
Do you say that you find it hard to drive and earn a living driving legally hours-wise?
Yeah, it's nearly impossible to make a living without excessive hours. I've been sacked because I run late. Can't afford to run late.
So could that have been a reason why this collision happened? That because of your physical and mental state, you didn't have the capacity to see what was on the road ahead of you properly and understand what it was until the last moment?
That would have a 90% and 90% cause of it, I suppose. And just
Kilmore started off defensively, denying any involvement in a collision in Victoria, but in the end admitted that he was tired, wasn't able to concentrate properly, hadn't seen the caravan until he was 15 or 20 metres behind it. And by that time, even with hard braking and swerving, it was too late to avoid a collision.
That action in itself was grossly negligent to the point that it's involuntary manslaughter.
It was the evidence from his own mouth that resulted in us believing that we had enough evidence to charge him with culpable driving.
But our job wasn't finished because we still had to find the physical evidence. Testimony is something that can often prove to be unreliable, or it doesn't necessarily make it through to court. As far as we're concerned, the physical evidence is something that can't change, it never alters. Its interpretation should always come back the same way, so it's the unalterable fact. And once you've got that, you know that you're okay to go forward into court.
When you look at the white W of the emblem from a distance, it just looks as though it's just pockmarked with flies. Until you get really close up and have a look, you realise that not all of the black spots are actually flies. One of the spots was in fact a hole. It was very small, only a few millimetres across, but it had this peculiar shape. I look on the back of the van and on the edge there's a Phillips head screw, and see not only is there white plastic inside the head of the screw, but sticking out from the side of that white plastic highly lustrous fibres.
Not only did the piece from the screw fit perfectly into the hole, but the fibres were an exact match to the cover from Kilmore's truck.
So at this stage for me, this is the final eureka type moment, and I can say this truck hit this caravan. And of course for me, that was the ultimate. That was the defining moment of the case from a forensic standpoint.
I regret not stopping at the scene because things would have been a hell of a lot easier. But that initial little time, whether it been 5 minutes or 10 minutes, from that time onwards, it's the hardest thing that the second hardest thing I've had to do in my life was ring my finance company up and say that I can't make a payment. You know, once you've gone past that stage, it's hard to own up. I've put my whole life so far into the truck. The last thing that I want to lose, but you know, due to my actions, I may have caused the life of a little kid. So, you know, I could blame someone else. I could, you know, or point the finger or what, but I fucked up, so I've got to take the circumstances, I've got to take the consequences.
A hit-run truck driver who rammed a four-wheel drive on the Hume Freeway, killing a 12-year-old boy, has been found guilty of culpable driving. 6 months after the Easter tragedy, Brett Kilmore was tracked down by a holidaying forensic scientist who recognised the damaged prime mover.
It took 6 months of intensive, extensive Australia-wide search to find this bloke.
The jury decision brings an end to a 2-year investigation that deeply affected them.
To lose a child has got to be, and I have kids of my own, has got to be one of the most tragic things that can happen to you in life.
It's truly amazing that they'd just put their whole heart and soul into it, and to me it seemed like it wasn't a 9-to-5 job for them, that they'd virtually dreamt and slept and had it 24 hours a day. That they just put so much resources and effort into finding this guy. I mean, even though I'd lost a big thing out of my life, in terms of other tragedies, it was probably not a big thing, but the police were willing to put so much time and effort into it. I was staggered.
To find one person out of the 160,000 that we started with, to come down to that finer point and actually present somebody before the courts is very satisfying as far as a job is concerned. And that's what we do.
A hit-run truck driver who rammed a four-wheel drive on the Hume Freeway, killing a 12-year-old boy, has been sentenced to 5 years in jail.
No sentence will ever replace Beth Fleming's young son, Nicky.
Every day I don't have my son. Every day I have that loss.
The court heard how the 33-year-old truckie was under financial and deadline pressure by his company. Police say it's a sad indictment on the transport industry.
Trucking companies push their drivers to unreasonable expectations.
Judge Francis Diet said nothing could excuse Kilmore's criminal conduct and no penalty could alleviate the Flemings' pain.
I hope that every day that he's in jail he thinks about driving carefully when he comes out.
If it was advertised more widely that they do catch these guys, I don't think you'd get any more hit and runs, because the investigation they go through is so thorough.
The police aren't going to give up looking for you. whether it be 6 months or a year or 2 years later, that knock may come on your door.
So you may as well stop and be a good person than think you can run and get away with taking responsibility, because they're going to get you in the end.